Hello, and welcome to The Art of Being Human. I may have mentioned during the last segment that if you are very anxious and nervous, that if you can distract yourself by looking at something, I remember picking up these pencils here and saying if you can just concentrate on something else other than what you're nervous about, it will drive the distraction down. And then I mentioned something about figure and ground and how that works. So today I want to start off by discussing more about figure and ground. It's an easy concept to get. We deal with it all the time, and we don't even think about it. It's just a part of our lives. For example, right now, I'm really focused on this camera sitting right in front of me, and everything else is ground. I'm not paying much attention to it. And so that is one example of figure and ground. Whatever it is that you're paying attention to, that is the focus of your attention, that's figure. Everything else is there and you're aware of it, but not substantially so, and that becomes ground. If you're studying for a test or you're preparing for a speech and you don't want to do it in a completely silent environment, you may put on a radio or you may put on the TV. You may need to have some extra sound around you, but as you're reading and as you're studying and as you're taking notes, whatever it is that you're doing, you're focusing on those things, and that becomes figure. Everything else is there, but it's ground. You don't pay so much attention to it. If you're driving a car, you're paying attention to the road, you're paying attention to the speed signs, to the exit signs, all of the signs that you have. If there's construction up ahead, are they holding a sign saying slow or stop? Are other directions being given? That's all figure. The ground is other cars coming on other lanes, the scenery around you, the clouds if they're there, the sun if it's out. That's all ground. You're aware of it. It's not that you're not aware of it, but you're not focusing on it. What you become focused on is figure. And if you look at books, there'll be a lot of drawings that are called figure ground illusions. Well, I've done some myself as part of the artwork that I do. So I brought in a couple of my own figure grounds, and I just want to have you focus on the chart over here. Now, I'm going to ask you, and I'm not going to say anything, but just ask you, what do you see? Now, you can see possibly two things. If you're looking at the bears, you see two bears, and anything else goes into the background. But if you're looking in the middle, you might notice that there's a lamp there. And if you're looking at the lamp, the bears become background and the lamp becomes figure. This is what's known as a figure ground illusion. It's one of my own, and it's called, what I've titled it is the bear lamp illusion. There are lots of books that have illusions like this to teach you about figure and ground. Usually there are two figures and in between them is a vase or something like that. I've done those too. So this is my illusion of figure and ground. And so when you get to the point, and if you just want to look at the bears for the moment, here's a bear, here's a bear. And everything in the middle is just like space. They're looking at each other, their paws are kind of touching, and it's just two bears, and everything else is just clear. And then if you focus in the middle, you'll see that there's kind of a lamp. This isn't a vase, it would be a lamp, because I've got on top of it a lampshade. Now, if I wanted to, I could take that lampshade out and I could just have this line here, and it would be a vase. It would be a bare vase illusion. But I decided when I drew it, and I said, you know what, I can do something different with this. And I added the lampshade, and so that becomes a lamp bear illusion. But the idea of it is that you can go from figure to ground, ground to figure, and if it's a very technical one, and they have those that you have to really hunt to find the differences between what's in the center and what's on the side. If it's one of those technical ones, you could spend quite a bit of time just focusing on one and completely losing sight of the other. And then when you redirect your attention, you see the other, and you completely lose sight of what you had as figure before. Now, I brought in one other that I have done, And this was, I think, maybe the first one I did when I was drawing this kind of thing, because I was teaching this and I decided I had to become an artist at the same time. Now take a look at this one. In the middle is a vase. It's light green vase. And it's a little picky, it has little picky points. And then when you realize that what are those picky points? Is that the design of the vase, or is it something else? And then you look and you see two figures. They're plain, they're darker green, they have foreheads, they're exactly like a mirror image of themselves. You have your forehead, the nose, the lip area right here, the chin, and then it goes down into the neck, This and this are practically alike. Not exactly alike, but very, very close to being alike. Now, some figure ground illusions are more complex than this. Well, here, if you focus on the vase in the middle, then the two faces should kind of start to fade away. Why? Because they're becoming ground, and the vase is becoming figure. You're paying attention just to the figure, which is going to be that vase, and when you stare at the vase, if you just do that kind of like an exercise, stare at the vase for a minute, and you practically don't recognize anything else. It's like there's a dark green background, and the vase is light green or yellowish green, however your television happens to be picking it up. And then all of a sudden you say, wait a minute here, there are two faces here, one over here and one over here. So if you concentrate on the faces, you see the faces, and the vase practically disappears on you. It's like background. You don't notice it. You are concentrating on the two faces. They're facing each other. And then this becomes ground, and these become figures, because you're concentrating onto them. I'd like to bring in some others, but I don't want to break copyright law. But there are some really, really interesting ones in which you really, when you can get they're kind of sucked up into them. And when you look at one figure, you completely lose what the second figure is. And then when you concentrate on the other figure, you lose what the first figure is. And they're very popular, and they're very interesting to watch. Now, what I've been trying to show through this is that when you are anxious and when you are nervous, what are you paying attention to? Your anxiety, your fear, what brought it on? How can you get relief from that? Something else. Look at something else. You know, try to figure out what it is that you're looking at. Grab the little basket of pencils. Concentrate on the paper clips. It doesn't take much, and it doesn't have to be very important. It's the idea that there is something that's not going to be earth-shaking. It doesn't have any real relevance to what you're doing, but you're concentrating on it, and everything else becomes ground. And when it becomes ground, you don't pay that much attention to it because you're focusing on something else. And one of the keys to handling anxiety is that you can do something to lessen it. Now, sometimes medication is necessary. I'm not opposed to medication. I'm not opposed to therapy. And for a lot of people, you really have to have therapy and medication. But for a short time use, for a crisis situation in which you are really getting very anxious and very nervous and very afraid, it might be wise to try something simple. And I know I've said this before, but in your calendar, most people have appointment calendars, and usually in the beginning or the end of the calendars, there is a little information. The information is like, for example, telephone numbers of the airlines in the United States, ounces, how many ounces to a pound, how many pounds to this and that. What about liters? What about liquid ounces? What about dry ounces? And it has lists of numbers, and you read through it, and you read through it, and you read through it, and by the time you finish reading through it and concentrating on it, whatever has been horrible around you, you're not so anxious about. And I know I've mentioned it before, but I think it bears repeating. When I went to a funeral of a close friend, and it was a very, very difficult funeral. He had died of a heart attack at a young age. Everybody was traumatized. He'd been recently married. You know, it was just a horrible situation. And everybody is crying, and they're having a horrible time with their emotions. And I'm sitting there, and I wasn't interchanging. I wasn't talking to anybody. But I would have if somebody had approached me, but I didn't want to interrupt their private moments anyway. And I looked at the calendar, and I did this more or less accidentally. I didn't do it on purpose, but I looked at my calendar, just something to do, and I got into that section of the appointment calendar that has the list of things, cities, and what are the main cities in certain states? Where are the states? Where are they with little maps and ounces and pounds and numbers of airlines and all of that? It's just stuff, you know? It's not bad, it's not good, it's just stuff. And I'm reading through this and I'm noticing I'm not emotional at all. I could have been, but I wasn't. I wasn't because that stabilized me. I was looking through all of this, and as everybody is having their horrible problems, I'm really quite comfortable. It's like it put me in a zone that was in a different zone than where everybody else was. And the fact of the matter is, if you're in a state of grief or high anxiety, it's like you're in another space. It's not like you are you. You don't feel like you. You're not reacting like you. And you're traumatized. And trauma is a terrible thing to go through. But that's what happens. And if you've been traumatized in your past, if you've been raped or stolen from or mugged or threatened or you've lost your house, or whatever it is that has been awful to you, that sets up a trauma situation, and you feel that, and your emotions are all over the place, and you're scared, and you're angry, and you're upset, and you're grief-stricken. So how do you settle that down? Well, you may need to have professional help in doing so, but on a short-term measure, you can always do something to focus on something else and level it down so it's tolerable. Now, what happens is we think of ourselves as being rational. We're thinking, you know, we are very rational people. But we're more emotional than rational. We're more reactive than what our thoughts are. So when something happens to you and you're frightened, the first thing you do is react to it emotionally, or at least most people will. Now, I can't speak for all people, but most people will react emotionally. And what are they going to do? They're going to cry. They're going to be scared. They're going to have various emotions. They're going to be depressed. They're going to be anxious, all of this stuff. And so what are they going to do? They're going to react to that emotionally, and they're going to feel terrible. It's an extreme stress on the body. Or if you're going into surgery, it's an extreme stress to the body, and you're frightened about it. And when you can do something, you're not taking medication, you're not putting something in your system, it's inconsequential, you're not going to be hurting yourself, you're not going to be hurting anybody else, and yet you can reduce that tension. Now, what's happening in later years, after the trauma is over with, a lot of people just get well from it, and they can think about it, and it doesn't bother them, or it bothers them a little bit, not too much. But not all people heal that way. There are a lot of people, as soon as you mention something or they think of something, they feel the same emotions as they felt then. Very hard emotions, difficult to deal with. It's like their emotions have taken on a life of their own. And how much they remember of the trauma, whether it's a single event or whether it was ongoing, such as it might be an abuse, it triggers all of these emotions. You not only remember the event or however amount of the event you remembered, but you re-experience the emotions that went with them. I know I've had people that I've counseled say, okay, I understand what happened. How does that make me well? And I usually tell them that's the first step. And where a person can, it's wise for them to understand what happened to them. But I don't say that you have to remember every single event. If it's a pattern of things, I think it's important to remember the pattern of things, but not necessarily everything. But it's good to bring up the emotions, and when it does, what do you do to lessen it? What do you do to get over it? Now, last segment, or maybe 2 segments ago, we talked about EMDR. And EMDR uses a lot of work with blinking of your eyes, looking here, looking there, and blinking your eyes. And that's a distraction. And it also causes your body to damp down on the emotions. And that is successful for a lot of people. Now, I'm going to do something else. I'm going to be talking about havening. That's another one of these kinds of things you can do in order to help yourself feel better. But you need to understand a little bit about the physiology of what's going on. I'm going to take this down, and I'm going to put the brains thing up that I sketched out here. Okay, here's a human brain. This would be the frontal lobe in this area. This would be the back of the brain. This is the medulla. This would be the spinal column. Now, this is the thing that you have to realize. With the brain, your thinking is in this area. Your thinking, your reasoning, your understanding of events and how they're going to affect you. But there's a little area in the back of the brain, toward the middle of the brain, but more toward the back, is the amygdala. It is a walnut-shaped group of ganglia. What is ganglia? It's just a group of cells, a group of nerve endings will be called a ganglia. And there it would be. That is more the primitive part of the brain, where the cerebellum is, where the medulla is, and where the spinal cord kind of taps in. And that controls the emotions and the memory of the emotions. And it's more in a primitive part of the brain. When you get frightened because you're remembering something that happened in the past and you're scared to death because you're afraid it's going to happen again, and you remember the emotions and you're going through that trauma, that's what's doing it right there. It's the amygdala that's doing it. It has kind of control of the primitive part of the brain that has to do with the emotions and the remembering of the emotions. And so what you have to do is damp that down if you can. And with the things that I'm talking about, like the EMDR, the havening, which I haven't described, but it will in a few minutes, it will calm that down. And it's a distraction. And when you can calm down your emotions through some kind of a distraction, then you can allow the front part of your brain to take over, and you can start reasoning. Now, I always tell people that if you're thinking about something and it's bothering you, and the emotions going with it are very, very intense, maybe more intense than they need to be, then it's probably because, one, you have things that in your past that have not been resolved, and they're letting themselves be known, even though maybe you don't know specifics of what they are, but they're there and they're letting themselves be known. Or you need to calm that down so you can start using your forebrain to think your way out of something and to become reasonable, because I think as human beings we're much more emotional than we are reasonable. This is what I believe. So at any rate, this is what's going on here. The amygdala, the emotions, the frontal lobe, where you do your thinking and where you become reasonable and so forth. And I just want to show you the location of it in the brain. So what happens when you have been traumatized? You can be traumatized over anything. You can be traumatized from mugging, from abuse, from seeing something that's fearful, by facing something that's fearful to you, from seeing something that's difficult, some kind of treatment that you're going through, some kind of loss that you're going through. It all can be very, very emotional and very frightening. And if you can calm yourself down through certain methods, then you can gain a measure of healing from that. Now, in long-standing cases of abuse, where a person's been abused for several years, it's a little bit difficult. But when you have been abused for years and you keep remembering it and it keeps bothering you over and over and over again, the EMDR seems to be quite effective in helping. Now, I don't want to go into EMDR all over again because we did it in the last 1 or 2 segments ago. But I'm going to, and I think maybe what I'll have to do is start it next time, talk about Havening. It's something that's new. There are a few hundred people, I guess, now that are trained to do it. If you go into any of these programs, they do seem to be successful. They're non-invasive, and there are things you need to remember about them. And that's the fact that they are new. There's some that are still kind of experimental. The good points is that they're non-invasive. You're not going to hurt yourself or anybody else. And another beauty about them is the fact they may bring up things that you need to resolve in a therapeutic sense that you have long forgotten about. But this is like temporary. You can use them day or night or any time. You can do it by yourself, although it's very wise to do it with somebody else. And the reason for that is that there's a sequence of things you have to do. You might tap your head, your forehead 4 or 5 times in a certain part of the procedure, but it's all non-invasive. There's no way you're going to hurt yourself, but there's nothing that you're going to do that's going to hurt yourself or anybody else. But the thing is, there's a sequence of events that you need to follow, and if you start with somebody that is trained in it, they can do it with you. They can show you how to do it, and then they can give you practice in doing it, and eventually, of course, you can do it on your own. And you can do it in your own home. You can find a quiet spot and just do it. No one has to see you. No one has to know. And you can feel much better, and you can stop your own anxiety. For now, concentrate on something that's distracting, that's inconsequential, that's not going to hurt you, that's not going to hurt anybody else. It may take some time, but afterwards you're going to feel better. You may have to do it a few times a day. You may have to do it quite a bit to begin with. Then after a while, you get used to being able to calm yourself down, and then you can go through your life without near as much pain as you had before. So I'm very hopeful for these new methods. I also want to mention some of them use magnetism, some of them use other things, and I need to say a word about magnetism. Magnets have been helpful for a lot of people. Some people put them in their shoes and they feel better and all that. But you have to remember this about magnets. If you are dealing with CDs, recording tape, like you'd put in a tape recorder, DVDs and all of that, you do not want to get them anywhere close to a magnet, because if you do, they can demagnetize, and then you've got an empty tape. Whatever you had on it, a speech, music, or whatever, a show, whatever, it's gone. And you can't use a tape. It's not magnetized. So if you're going to use magnets, and some of these cases they do use magnets, you can't allow yourself to be anywhere near anything that could be demagnetized that's important to you. And I'm thinking in terms of CDs, DVDs, and tape recordings, because you can lose everything that's on it, and then it's gone. There's no way of reclaiming it. There's no way of getting it back. So I do not handle, because I do a lot of music. I still do a lot of music and some recordings and all of that. So I don't touch anything that has to do with a magnet. I mean, that's out. If I were to use anything, it would have to be non-magnetic. And I'm not using anything at all. But I'm just bringing this to you because I think it might help you in the long run to have something you can use to help your anxiety. So I'm going to close it here, and on the next segment we'll be going into Havening, which is another form of something to do to reduce anxiety, just like EMDR does. EMDR is quite successful, and it's successful on a long-term basis. So we'll do Havening. This is brand new, and we'll talk about that next. So please join me next time.